I was the nanny. CEO promised me double pay to forget what happened that night, but I went to a lawyer. At 23, Isabella Moretti left the shores of northern Italy and stepped into a world she never imagined, the glittering estates of the Hamptons, where power wore designer suits and silence was often bought in cash. Hired as a live-in nanny for the children of Nicholas Blake, a 45-year-old CEO known more for boardroom brutality than fatherly tenderness, Isabella brought light into a cold house. The children adored her, the staff respected her, and Nicholas noticed her. It all changed one late night. What began as a conversation over wine turned into something blurred, a moment Isabella didn't invite, didn't consent to, and couldn't forget. The next morning, Nicholas didn't apologize. He offered her double her salary and a condition. You stay. You stay. But Isabella wasn't raised to be silenced. She packed her bags and walked straight into a lawyer's office. Because some lines, no matter how powerful the man, are never his to cross, and no amount of money can erase the truth. This isn't a story about revenge. It's about courage, about dignity, and about a young woman who chose to speak when staying silent would have been safer. Subscribe to the channel and follow Isabella's journey. Her fight for justice has only just begun, and what comes next will shake everything. Chapter 1. The House on Lily Pond Lane. The Hamptons gleamed like a mirage in late June, all pristine white fences and manicured hydrangea bushes. Isabella clutched her weathered leather suitcase as the taxi pulled up to 478 Lily Pond Lane, the Blake estate, a sprawling Georgian revival that loomed against the cloudless sky like a mountain of white marble and privilege. "First time in the Hamptons?" the driver asked, eyeing her through the rearview mirror. "First time in America," Isabella replied, her northern Italian accent softening her words. At 23, Isabella had left behind the shores of Lake Como with a teaching degree, a handful of English phrases practiced to perfection, and her nana's weathered advice. Your dignity isn't for sale, Piccola. Remember that when the world tries to bargain. The Blake household staff greeted her with practiced politeness. Mrs. Reynolds, the housekeeper with salt and pepper hair pinned so tightly it seemed to pull her face into permanent judgment. Carlos, the groundskeeper, whose smile was the only genuine welcome. And Vivian, the cook who measured Isabella with a glance that said she'd seen other nannies come and go. "The children are in the East Wing playroom," Mrs. Reynolds instructed, her voice as starched as her uniform. "Mr. Blake prefers them quiet during his conference calls. He works from home on Fridays." The children, Emma, age 7, with her father's calculating blue eyes but none of his coldness, and Theo, age 5, with a mop of unruly curls and a laugh that seemed to apologize for itself, were building a fort when Isabella entered. Their previous nanny had left abruptly 3 weeks ago. No explanations given, no goodbyes allowed. "Are you our new Mary Poppins?" Emma asked, suspicious and hopeful in equal measure. Isabella knelt down to their level, her sundress pooling around her. "Better. I'm Isabella, and I don't need an umbrella to fly. Just a really good book and some imagination." Theo giggled, hiding behind his sister. "Daddy says imagination is for people who can't handle reality." Something in Isabella's chest tightened. "Well," she whispered conspiratorially, "sometimes reality needs a little help to become extraordinary." By the time Nicholas Blake entered the playroom at 6 p.m. sharp, Isabella had transformed the children's fort into an archaeological expedition site, complete with artifacts, household objects wrapped in linen napkins, and a map of an imaginary ancient city that bore a suspicious resemblance to the Blake estate. Nicholas Blake was exactly as the gossip blogs portrayed him, 6'2" of tailored intimidation, with prematurely silver temples that spoke of stress rather than age, and eyes that assessed everyone's value before a word was spoken. At 45, he'd built Blake Tech from a startup to a billion-dollar cybersecurity firm by, as Forbes put it, having the vision to see vulnerabilities and the ruthlessness to eliminate them. "Daddy!" Theo launched himself at his father's legs, while Emmett approached more cautiously, seeking approval first. "I see you've settled in," Nicholas addressed Isabella without introducing himself. His tone suggested she'd taken liberties with his household rather than done her job. "I'm sorry, Mr. Blake, I'm Isabella Moretti, and yes, I've reviewed their schedules, but I thought today might be an exception since it's my first day and—" "Exceptions lead to expectations, Miss Moretti, in my house and in my company." His gaze flickered to the fort, then back to her with disapproval. "Tomorrow, we return to structure." That evening, after tucking the children in with Italian lullabies that made even Emma's guarded heart soften, Isabella sat alone in her suite above the garage. The space was luxurious by any standard. A queen bed with linens that cost more than her flight to America, a kitchenette with marble countertops, and a bathroom with a rainfall shower. A beautiful cage, nonetheless. She opened her laptop and video called her mother back in Italy. "Come va, bella mia?" Her mother's face appeared, the connection making her look older somehow. The kitchen of their modest Lake Como home visible in the background. "It's different," Isabella replied carefully. "The house is like a museum. The children are wonderful, but their father—" She hesitated.
Her mother's expression turned knowing. Men with money often think it buys them the right to everything. "You remember what your Nana said?" Isabella smiled despite herself. "My dignity isn't for sale." "Esatto. Now, tell me about the children." As June turned to July, Isabella became the heart of the Blake children's world. She taught Emma to braid her own hair. "Independence starts with the little things," she'd say, and showed Theo how to overcome his fear of the ocean by treating the waves like dance partners. She filled their days with structure but left room for wonder, something the Blake household manual hadn't accounted for. Nicholas Blake remained a distant figure, appearing at precisely the same times each day, his interactions with his children formal and brief. Yet Isabella often felt his gaze lingering when he thought she wasn't aware, observing her with the children, noting how they flourished under her care, how laughter had returned to rooms that had forgotten its sound. It was at the 4th of July party, hosted at the Blake estate for East Hampton's elite, that something shifted. Isabella had been instructed to keep the children presentable and visible. "Perfect family optics are essential in my position," Nicholas had explained with corporate detachment. Isabella wore a simple white sundress, her dark hair caught in the sea breeze, as she supervised Emma and Theo among the children of tech moguls, finance titans, and old money families who populated Nicholas's world. She felt his approach before she saw him. "They behave differently with you," Nicholas said, appearing beside her, crystal tumbler in hand, his voice almost accusatory. "Their mother had 5 nannies before she left. None of them—" "Connected?" Isabella supplied when he trailed off. "Children aren't business acquisitions, Mr. Blake. They don't respond to quarterly targets or performance reviews. They need consistency, creativity, boundaries, and to know they're loved exactly as they are." Something flickered across his face, recognition, perhaps, or regret. "And you provide all that for $24 an hour?" Isabella met his gaze directly, unintimidated by his attempt to reduce her contribution to a transaction. "I provide that because they deserve it. The salary is what you owe me for my professional services. The love is what they've earned simply by being themselves." For the first time, Nicholas Blake looked at her, really looked at her, with something approaching respect. "You're nothing like anyone in my world, Miss Moretti." "That," she replied with quiet confidence, "might be exactly what your world needs." Later that night, after the guests had departed and the children were asleep, Isabella found herself alone on the vast terrace overlooking the Atlantic. The sounds of the cleaning staff inside faded against the rhythm of the waves. "May I join you?" Nicholas's voice came from behind her. And so began the conversation that would change everything. If you've ever felt like Isabella, stepping into a world where the rules seemed designed to work against you, where your voice was the least powerful in the room, then you know this journey isn't just a story. It's a reflection of what so many of us face. Subscribe to continue this journey with Isabella as she navigates power, betrayal, and ultimately finds her voice in a world that would prefer she stayed silent. Because some stories aren't just told, they're lived. Hit that subscribe button to make sure you don't miss what happens next when lines are crossed and Isabella must make the choice between comfortable silence and costly truth. Chapter 2. Lines Crossed. The terrace overlooking the Atlantic became a confessional of sorts that night. The staff had retired, the children were asleep, and the house stood sentinel against the darkness. Nicholas Blake, freed from the performance of the day's party, seemed almost human as he approached with 2 glasses of Barolo. "You know your Italian wines," Isabella observed, accepting the glass with a cautious smile. "I know value when I see it," he replied, something unfamiliar softening his typically sharp features. "And Italy produces some of the finest things in the world." His gaze lingered on her face a moment too long. Isabella turned toward the ocean, letting the breeze cool her suddenly warm cheeks. "The children were wonderful today. Emma even spoke to the congressman's daughter, a breakthrough for her." Nicholas leaned against the stone balustrade, his tailored jacket discarded, shirt sleeves rolled to reveal 4 arms mapped with the faint scars of someone who'd built things before he'd built empires. "Emma has her mother's social anxiety. Valerie could turn on the charm when required, but it cost her. Eventually, the cost became too high." It was the first time he'd mentioned his ex-wife by name, the woman who'd left him with 2 children and a reputation for being impossible to please. "And what about you, Mr. Blake?" Isabella asked, the wine emboldening her. "What costs do you calculate?" His laugh was unexpected, low and genuine, rusty from disuse. "Everyone calculates, Miss Moretti. The difference is in what currency we use. You, for instance, measure in moments. I've watched you with my children. You count their smiles, their discoveries, their growth. I've always measured in fiscal quarters and market share." "Until now?" Isabella asked, sensing the unspoken shift. Nicholas turned to face her fully. In the moonlight, the hardened CEO seemed almost vulnerable. "Until you showed me what I've been missing." The conversation deepened as the night air grew heavy with salt and unspoken possibilities. Nicholas spoke of his childhood in Boston's working-class Dorchester neighborhood, of clawing his way through MIT on scholarships and sheer determination, of building Blake Tech from his garage while Valerie was pregnant with Emma. Isabella shared stories of Lake Como, of teaching village children before seeking adventure across the ocean, of her father's death that had taught her life's brevity, and the importance of living authentically. The wine bottle emptied. A second appeared. The space between them on the terrace shrank. "You've transformed this house," Nicholas said, his voice lower now, intimate. The children laugh again. Even Mrs. Reynolds smiled yesterday. A meteorological impossibility. Isabella laughed, the sound carrying across the manicured lawn to the rhythmic waves beyond. "Perhaps you've all forgotten that life isn't just about achievement. It's about connection." "Connection," Nicholas repeated, as if testing a foreign concept on his tongue. His hand brushed hers on the balustrade, accidentally at first, then with deliberate intention. "I've missed that." Warning bells chimed distantly in Isabella's mind, muffled by wine and the disarming vulnerability of this new Nicholas. She gently withdrew her hand. "It's getting late, Mr. Blake." "Nicholas," he corrected, stepping closer. "I think we're beyond formalities, don't you, Isabella?" The way he said her name, like he owned the syllables, sent contradictory shivers of warning and attraction through her. "I should check on the children." "They're asleep," he said, his hand finding the small of her back. "And I'm their father.
I'll know if they need anything. What began as a conversation between two people finding unexpected common ground shifted into something else entirely, something Isabella hadn't invited and couldn't quite process through the haze of wine and fatigue. Nicholas's hand moved from her back to her waist, then to her face, cupping her cheek with a presumptive tenderness that made her stomach tighten. "Mr. Blake." "Nicholas," he insisted, his thumb brushing her lower lip. "Say it." "This isn't appropriate," Isabella managed, stepping back until the balustrade pressed against her spine. "I work for you. I care for your children." His expression darkened, not with anger, but with something more complicated. Desire tangled with the absolute certainty of a man unaccustomed to hearing no. "You're not like the others, Isabella. You see me, not the CEO, not the bank account. Me. And I see you." What happened next occurred in fragmentary moments that Isabella would later struggle to sequence properly. His lips on hers, insistent and tasting of expensive wine. Her hands against his chest, to steady herself or push him away, she couldn't later determine. The sound of breaking glass as her wine tumbled from her hand to shatter on the terrace stones. His hands becoming bolder, proprietary, moving over her body with entitled confidence. And finally, her voice finding its strength. "Stop. Now." Nicholas Blake froze, confusion, and then something like embarrassment crossing his features as he stepped back. Reality seemed to crash back into him with the force of a breaking wave. "I'm sorry," he said, though the apologies sounded unpracticed. The wine doesn't excuse it," Isabella said, her voice steadier than her hands. "I'm going to my room now. We will not speak of this again." She left him standing alone on the terrace, the broken glass glittering at his feet like the fragments of professional boundaries now scattered beyond repair. Morning arrived with piercing clarity and a summons. Mrs. Reynolds knocked on Isabella's door at precisely 7 a.m., her expression unreadable. "Mr. Blake would like to see you in his study before the children wake." The study, like everything in Nicholas Blake's orbit, projected calculated power. Dark walnut paneling, leather-bound first editions he'd likely never read, and a desk large enough to intimidate anyone sitting across from it. Nicholas stood looking out the window, his back to the door when Isabella entered. "Close the door, please," he said without turning. Isabella did, but remained standing near it. "Mr. Blake, about last night?" "I've been thinking about your position here," he interrupted, finally turning to face her. No trace remained of the almost vulnerable man from the terrace. This was Nicholas Blake, CEO, master of difficult conversations and strategic pivots. "You've done exceptional work with the children. They've flourished under your care." He moved to his desk, opened a drawer, and removed a folder. "I'd like to offer you a revised contract." He slid the document across the polished surface. "Double your current salary, effective immediately, plus performance bonuses and extended healthcare coverage." Isabella didn't move to take the folder. "Why?" Nicholas's expression remained corporate neutral. "Because you've earned it. Your value to this household is clear." "This isn't about my performance with the children." It wasn't a question. A flash of impatience crossed his face. "Does it matter? It's a generous offer that most people in your position would accept without hesitation." "Most people in my position," Isabella echoed, her nana's words ringing in her ears, "might not recognize hush money when they see it." His jaw tightened. That's an ugly characterization of a professional advancement opportunity. Is it? Isabella stepped forward, leaving the folder untouched. What are the terms of this opportunity, Mr. Blake? That I stay? That I stay quiet? I would expect discretion, yes. What happened last night was a momentary lapse in judgment that we can both move past professionally. His tone suggested he was offering her a reasonable solution to a shared problem rather than attempting to buy her silence. A momentary lapse, Isabella repeated, the words bitter on her tongue. One that you think has a price tag? Nicholas straightened, his patience visibly thinning. Everyone has a price, Ms. Moretti. I'm simply offering you yours. Double salary for doing exactly what you're already doing, caring for my children who adore you. Isabella looked at the man before her. Powerful, accustomed to solving problems with money, genuinely bewildered that she wasn't jumping at his offer. In that moment, she saw him clearly. Not a monster, but something almost more dangerous. A man who truly believed that everything and everyone could be negotiated for, acquired, or silenced. My nonna told me something before I left Italy, she said quietly. Your dignity isn't for sale. I didn't fully understand what she meant until this moment. She turned toward the door, then paused. I'll pack my things and be gone by noon. Please tell Emma and Theo that I'm sorry I couldn't say goodbye properly. Don't be dramatic, Nicholas called after her, his voice hardening. You're punishing my children because of a misunderstanding between adults. Isabella's hand stilled on the doorknob as she turned back to him, tears threatening but held in check by a determination. No, Mr. Blake. You're the one who risked their happiness when you decided I was something you could buy rather than someone you should respect. The silence that followed her out of the study hung heavy as the summer humidity, pregnant with unspoken threats and the particular rage of a powerful man denied. Isabella moved through the morning with mechanical efficiency, packing her modest belongings while the children were taken to their sailing lesson by Mrs. Reynolds. Every fiber of her being wanted to wait, to hug them goodbye, to promise she wasn't abandoning them like everyone else in their short lives. But Nicholas Blake hadn't built his empire by allowing people to defy him without consequences, and Isabella couldn't risk what a confrontation in front of the children might do to their already fragile sense of security. Instead, she wrote them each a letter. For Emma, a reminder of her strength and uniqueness. For Theo, a celebration of his generous heart and curious mind. She sealed them in envelopes with their names written in her neat script, placing them on their perfectly made beds alongside small treasures she'd brought from Italy, a smooth stone from Lake Como for Emma, and a tiny carved wooden boat for Theo. As she dragged her suitcase down the stairs, Carlos appeared in the foyer, his usually cheerful face solemn. I gold you a taxi, Isabella. It'll be here in 5 minutes. Isabella nodded gratefully. Thank you, Carlos. He glanced around to ensure they were alone. Mr. Blake has a reputation for making problems disappear, Isabella. Be careful. Her spine stiffened. I'm not a problem. I'm a person. Carlos's smile was sad. To men like him, there's often no difference. The taxi arrived precisely when promised, the driver mercifully silent as Isabella fought back tears on the drive away from Lily Pond Lane. She directed him not to the bus station or the train, but to an address in East Hampton's more modest business district, a small law office with a freshly painted blue door and a discreet brass plaque reading Morrison and Associates, Employment Law Specialists. Because Isabella Moretti had not come to America to be silenced, and Nicholas Blake was about to learn that some things, dignity, justice, truth, truly weren't for sale. Chapter 3. The Price of Dignity. Catherine Morrison's office smelled of lemon furniture polish and determination. At 58, with silver-streaked black hair pulled into a no-nonsense bun and reading glasses perpetually perched on her nose, she had the weathered look of someone who'd seen every trick in the corporate playbook and had developed countermeasures for each one. "Let me get this straight," she said, leaning back in her chair after listening to Isabella's account. "Nicholas Blake, CEO of Blake Tech and East Hampton's favorite son, made unwanted advances, then tried to buy your silence with a doubled salary when you rejected him?" Isabella nodded, her hands clasped tightly in her lap to stop their trembling. "I have the contract he offered, and text messages from this morning where he's already switched to threatening me about defamation if I speak about what happened." Catherine's eyes narrowed behind her glasses. "Smart of you to save those. Blake has a reputation for making accusations disappear, usually with money, sometimes with more creative methods." She tapped her pen against her legal pad. "3 nannies before you in the last 2 years. All left suddenly, all unreachable now." A chill ran through Isabella. "Do you think he paid them off?" "Absolutely. Made them sign NDAs tighter than Fort Knox?" "Without question." Catherine set down her pen with precision. "The question is, what do you want, Ms. Moretti?" Isabella blinked, unprepared for the directness. I don't know. Justice. For him to acknowledge what he did was wrong?" "Justice is subjective, and men like Blake rarely acknowledge wrongdoing. So let me rephrase. What outcome would make you feel whole again? Money? A public apology? His resignation from the company? Because each path has different costs, and not just financial ones." The question hung in the air as Isabella considered what would actually heal the breach of trust, the violation of professional boundaries, and the entitled assumption that her dignity had a price tag. She said finally, "I want protection for the children. They've already lost their mother to whatever drove her away. I don't want to be another adult who disappeared without explanation." She straightened in her chair. "And I want him to face consequences, real ones, not just writing a check from his endless resources. I want change, not just for me, but for whoever comes next." Catherine studied her with newfound respect. "That's not the usual answer I get." A small smile curved her lips. "I think we can work with that." The following weeks transformed Isabella in ways she hadn't anticipated. The shy Italian nanny who had arisen in America with dreams of adventure found herself in the center of a carefully orchestrated legal chess match. Catherine Morrison proved to be a grandmaster.
"Blake's people have made their first move," Catherine announced one morning, waving a document as Isabella entered her office. "A settlement offer with an NDA that would basically prevent you from even acknowledging you ever worked for him." "How much?" Isabella asked, hating that the question had to be asked. "200,000, plus a glowing recommendation letter for future employment." Catherine's expression was calculating. "It's insultingly low for a man of his resources, which tells me he's testing whether you're serious or just looking for a quick payout." Isabella's stomach churned. "What do? We decline, politely but firmly, and we make our countermove." Catherine slid a different document across the desk. "This is our response. Not a settlement demand, but a letter outlining our intent to file a formal complaint with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission and the New York State Division of Human Rights." Isabella scanned the document, the legal language both intimidating and empowering. "Will this protect the children from publicity?" "That's our leverage," Catherine explained. "Blake values his public image above almost everything. We're offering a path
that addresses the wrongdoing without dragging his family through public scrutiny. She leaned forward. But, Isabella, I need you to be prepared. He won't go quietly. There will be character assassination attempts, possibly job interference. The question becomes, are you strong enough to withstand what's coming? Isabella thought of Emma and Theo, of her Nana's wisdom, of all the women who had faced powerful men and been silenced. I'm Italian, she said with a small smile. We're built to endure. 3 days later, Nicholas Blake requested a meeting. The conference room at Morrison & Associates was deliberately modest. No power furniture or intimidation architecture, just a simple table, comfortable chairs, and excellent coffee in plain white mugs. Catherine had chosen the setting strategically, removing Blake from his familiar power environments. When Nicholas Blake entered, followed by a silver-haired attorney from a prestigious Manhattan firm, Isabella felt her heart race. He looked different somehow, still impeccably dressed in a suit that cost more than her entire wardrobe, still carrying himself with the confidence of someone who commanded rooms by birthright. But there was something new in his eyes when they met hers. Uncertainty. Ms. Moretti, he acknowledged with a clipped nod. Mr. Blake, she returned evenly. The attorneys handled the preliminary exchanges, formal, professional, loaded with subtext. Then Catherine deliberately created an opening. Perhaps it would be beneficial for our clients to speak directly for a moment, with our presence of course, but without our voices dominating. Nicholas's attorney began to object, but Blake raised a hand to silence him. I'm amenable to that. When the room quieted, Nicholas spoke first, his voice carefully controlled. The children miss you. Theo asks for you every night at bedtime.
It was a strategic opening, using the children as emotional leverage. Isabella felt the intended impact, but didn't let it show. I miss them too, which is why my primary concern remains their welfare. Nicholas's jaw tightened. If that were true, you wouldn't be putting their family through this process. Accountability isn't a punishment, Mr. Blake, Isabella replied, Catherine's coaching evident in her calm delivery. It's an opportunity for growth. Growth, he repeated with a humorless laugh. That's what we're calling financial extraction now? Isabella leaned forward slightly. If I wanted your money, I would have taken the doubled salary and kept quiet. What I want is for you to understand that your position doesn't entitle you to cross boundaries, that your wealth doesn't give you the right to treat people as acquisitions. Something flickered across Nicholas's face, a recognition, perhaps, that she wasn't playing the game by his familiar rules. What exactly do you want then, Isabella? The use of her first name was deliberate, an attempt to re-establish the personal connection from that night on the terrace. I want structural change, she answered, the words feeling right as they formed. A company-wide harassment policy review, mandatory leadership training on power dynamics and consent, an anonymous reporting system for employees, and a substantial donation to organizations supporting immigrant workers' rights. Nicholas blinked, visibly thrown, by demands that weren't centered on personal gain. His attorney leaned over to whisper something, but Blake waved him off again. And for yourself, he pressed, everyone wants something for themselves. Isabella exchanged a glance with Catherine, who gave an almost imperceptible nod of encouragement. A letter of apology that acknowledges the specific behavior without excuses, no non-disclosure agreement, and, she took a steadying breath, I want to say goodbye to the children properly. Not a permanent goodbye, but a transition that doesn't leave them feeling abandoned. The settlement took another week to finalize. Nicholas Blake, master negotiator, pushed back on several points, particularly the absence of an NDA. Catherine pushed equally hard, reminding his legal team that Isabella's restraint thus far had been a choice, not an obligation. In the end, the agreement reflected a rare instance where moral capital outweighed financial capital. Blake Tech would implement all the structural changes Isabella had requested. Nicholas would write the apology letter under Catherine's supervision, and, most surprisingly to Isabella, he agreed to a supervised farewell with the children, to be followed by monthly video calls until they adjusted to her absence.
When Isabella asked Catherine why he had conceded on that point, the attorney's response was unexpectedly gentle. Sometimes, Miss Moretti, we misjudge people's motivations. I think Mr. Blake actually does care about his children's well-being, even if his methods are flawed.
The farewell took place in the Blake estate's garden, with Catherine present but maintaining a discreet distance. Emma, in her practical way, had questions. "Are you leaving because of something I did?" "Never," Isabella assured her, holding the girl's hands firmly. "Sometimes adults have disagreements that have nothing to do with the children they love. I'm not leaving you. I'm just changing how I can be in your life." Theo was less analytical, more emotional. He clung to Isabella with the unreserved affection of a 5-year-old. "Will you still tell me Italian stories sometimes?" "Every month," Isabella promised, fighting back tears. "And I'll record some for Mrs. Reynolds to play at bedtime." Nicholas stood apart, watching the interactions with an unreadable expression. When the children went inside for lunch, he approached Isabella cautiously. "They've never bonded with anyone the way they did with you. Not even their mother, if I'm being honest." Isabella nodded, unsure how to respond to this unexpected vulnerability. "I'm not good at apologies," Nicholas continued, his discomfort evident. "The letter satisfies the legal requirement, but—" He met her gaze directly. "I am sorry, Isabella. Not just for that night, but for thinking everything has a price, for not seeing the difference between value and worth." It wasn't a perfect apology, but it was perhaps the most honest thing Nicholas Blake had ever said to her. Isabella acknowledged it with a small nod. "Learn from this, not for me, but for them." She glanced toward the house where the children had disappeared. "They're watching how you treat people, especially women. They're learning what's acceptable." As she turned to leave the Blake estate for the final time, Nicholas called after her. "What will you do now?" Isabella paused, the weight of possibility suddenly exhilarating rather than frightening. "I'm staying in America. Catherine has connected me with a school in Brooklyn that needs bilingual teachers." A small smile touched her lips. It turns out, standing up to a CEO makes for a compelling personal statement in job interviews. 3 months later, Isabella stood before her first-grade class in a sun-filled Brooklyn classroom, teaching children from diverse backgrounds the magic of bilingual education. Her apartment was small but entirely her own, decorated with treasures from Italy and photographs of Lake Como. She had made new friends, including Catherine Morrison, who had become something of a mentor. The settlement money, which Nicholas had ultimately tripled from his initial offer without the NDA, sat mostly untouched in an investment account Catherine had helped her establish. She had used a small portion to bring her mother to visit America, showing her the new life she had built from what could have been merely a painful chapter. Her phone chimed with a calendar reminder. Her monthly video call with Emma and Theo was scheduled for that evening. They had grown slightly in the intervening months, their updates filled with school adventures and new discoveries. Nicholas never participated in the calls directly, but Isabella had noticed subtle changes in the children's stories. Their father was home for dinner more often, had taken them camping himself rather than sending them with staff, and had started a tradition of Sunday morning pancakes. Small changes, perhaps, but meaningful ones. As Isabella prepared her lesson for the day, her phone chimed again, this time with a news alert. The headline made her catch her breath. Blake Tech announces industry-leading workplace conduct policies and $2 million donation to workers' rights organizations. Attached was a photograph of Nicholas Blake at a podium, looking more human somehow, less armored. The article quoted him directly, "Power without accountability isn't leadership, it's tyranny. At Blake Tech, we're committed to creating environments where everyone's dignity is respected, regardless of their position." Isabella set down her phone, a complex emotion washing over her. Not vindication exactly, but something quieter and more profound. Change, real change, rippling outward from a moment of courage. Her students began filing into the classroom, bright-eyed and chattering in a blend of English, Spanish, Arabic, and Mandarin.
Isabella welcomed them with a warm smile, her accent still present, but now a bridge rather than a barrier. "Good morning, everyone," she said, her voice clear and confident. "Today we're going to learn about courage, il coraggio, and the power of standing up for what's right, even when it's difficult." A small girl in the front row raised her hand. "Miss Moretti, were you ever scared to stand up for yourself?" Isabella thought of the terrace overlooking the Atlantic, of the moment she walked away from a doubled salary, of facing Nicholas Blake across the conference table at Catherine's office. "Yes, I've been very scared, but I discovered something important that I want all of you to remember. Your dignity isn't for sale, and standing up for it, even when you're afraid, is how you discover just how strong you really are." This story isn't just fiction, it's a reflection of the choices thousands of women face every day when confronted with power imbalances and boundary violations. Isabella's journey from vulnerability to empowerment reminds us that our dignity is never for sale, and that true change happens when we find the courage to speak truth to power. If Isabella's story resonated with you, or if you know someone who needs to hear this message, please subscribe to our channel. Your subscription supports more stories that inspire courage and remind us that standing up for what's right, even when it's difficult, creates ripples that can transform not just our own lives, but the world around us. Hit that subscribe button now and join a community that believes in the power of dignity, justice, and truth.